Hi, I'm Sarah Ciston, a virtual fellow at the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society, where I research how to bring anti-racist, queer, and intersectional feminist theories, ethics, and tactics to artificial intelligence. I'm also a Mellon Fellow in Digital Humanities and a PhD candidate in Media Arts and Practice at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. In my work with creative coders and with artists learning to code, I'm interested in how to break down any intimidating aura around AI. And so today I'm really excited to talk about how AI is misunderstood as being all-knowing and impossible to understand. There's this pervasive idea that AI understands me, but I can't understand it, and I'm ready to bust through that myth. AI is not smarter than us, but AI should be understandable and accessible. First, I'll talk briefly about the myth itself, what purpose it serves in culture, and why it's so dangerous to maintain it. Then I'll explain in broad terms what's happening when AI makes decisions, what elements go into those decisions, and the human influence that's involved. I'll open up the black box and show how it isn't so mysterious after all. Finally, and most importantly, I want to explain why it's so important that all of us understand, at least to some extent, what AI does, so that rather than be intimidated or misled by algorithmic decision-making, we can contribute our multiple perspectives to designing and implementing the systems that impact us. I'll share some examples of how folks are doing AI differently by bringing different voices together in conversation. And I'll touch on some of the specific things that each of us can do in all of our encounters with AI, whether we are engineers, scholars, total newbies, or seasoned newsfeed scrollers. So let's get started. The aura of AI is all around us, and it's easy to fall into its modes of thinking that transfer personal responsibility onto machines. I often catch myself saying things like, my phone knows better than me, or the algorithms are listening, I'm sure they'll tell me what to buy or what to watch. Or I hear even seasoned engineers referring to AI systems as knowing or thinking or seeing or understanding, inadvertently anthropomorphizing them into characters and companions with agency in our shared existence. While this may feel harmless, it perpetuates the belief that AI can or should operate outside of human control, that AI is wiser, more neutral, more accurate, when in fact there are always humans involved under the hood in these socio-technical systems. AI are no more accurate or rational than their designers, and often less so. Their decisions are still based on the imperfect reasoning with which they were built. And it removes the responsibility for their actions from the humans who make and operate them. It's sort of like saying, the AI made me do it, or like removing the subject of a sentence by speaking in a passive voice. It's obscuring both their human creators and the human impacts that AI has. So these unequal impacts are putting extremely high stakes on AI's misunderstandings. The all too human imperfections of AI are amplified through the scale and speed of AI, but the stakes are different for different people who bear the brunt of algorithmic systems. It's not just autocorrect and Instagram influences, but predictive policing, border controls, social credit scores, and drone strikes. When cell phone data is being analyzed by AI to determine if someone is labeled a terrorist or not, the stakes of these decisions are quite literally life or death. And it's very clear from the current upswell of research on AI bias that AI does not understand us well, let alone understand us equally. Examples are widespread and troubling, like the ProPublica study of AI criminal risk assessment that found it terrifyingly inaccurate, or the ImageNet Roulette project by Kate Crawford and Trevor Paglen, which revealed the deeply biased tools that were being used by many popular language and image classification systems. You might recognize this particular flibbertigibbet here. In my own tests, first ImageNet Roulette labeled me a foolish woman and a creep, and then it labeled me miss and ma'am once I smiled. And when I showed more of my neck, it labeled me a prostitute. Just to one small and relatively harmless example of how subjective these so-called rational systems are. But when applied to things like predictive policing or drone strikes, they very quickly become much more harmful. Meanwhile, the cultural aura around AI systems allows their data to assume the status of impartial fact when they are really quite so subjective. So rather than upholding the myth of AI's ability to understand us and the myth of AI as unknowable and a black box, let's look inside. Artificial intelligence is just a lot of decisions made very quickly. And they're made with math, but math isn't magic. You may have heard of AI machine learning described as neural networks, or seen images similar to this one showing how information moves through a neural network. And without detailing the different types of AI, machine learning, deep learning, etc., let's look at this drawing of a very simple neural network represented here. All you need to know for our purposes is that at each point here is called a node, an instruction is given, a calculation is done, some kind of decision is made for how to proceed. The AI may be looking at part of an image or reading your latest text, but it's not actually looking or reading. Every bit of data has become a numerical representation and is processed through mathematical calculations based on a weighted probability or simply a likelihood. These are tiny, binary, either-or decisions enacted at very high speed and in mass. No matter how complex the AI gets, each point or node or step along the way is a small, predetermined, logical operation. This may happen hundreds or thousands of times. It may happen in so-called hidden layers that were not coded in the same way as the input nodes, but they're still just lots of little computational switches determined originally by humans. They're not superhuman understanding. All algorithms are simply instructions or procedures, in these cases described for computers rather than people, using code and math rather than descriptive sentences, but otherwise not so different from following predetermined steps to make, say, a salad. AI isn't more rational or emotionless. It's just as human as any decision-making amplified at massive scale and speed. So this is super important to keep in mind because there are a million ways to make a salad and a billion ways to write an algorithm to complete a task. Who you are and what you know coming into the process will likely determine what goes into that salad or that algorithm. More specifically, that's going to include lots of things that are socially informed. What ingredients or what data you select, how much of each item you decide to use, how you chop it, or how you label and weight your data, how you write the recipe or the algorithm, the order you choose to do things, and the procedures and tools that you use. All of this goes to determine how the salad or the very important socio-technical artificial intelligence system comes out tasting or acting in the end. And none of these choices are by default neutral, natural, or automatically a given. Rather, they're all opportunities for human bias or influence, both positive and negative. There are all different kinds of algorithms. Here on the left is an example of a bubble sort algorithm running on a color array, which looks lovely, but it's just working by brute force. It passes over repeatedly until it finds something out of place. It might look very intelligent and graphical, but it doesn't have aesthetic taste. It's not seeing color. It's just reading pixels' number values. If the next value in the sequence is lower, not higher, it swaps their position. Then it makes another pass doing the same thing until they're all in order. Many of the intelligent systems we use are not actually even using artificial intelligence or bona fide machine learning at all, but just plain programming and simpler algorithms, just combined and applied as part of larger systems that include many humans and other moving parts that together appear smart. For example, in content moderation or gig economies like Amazon's Mechanical Turk, human workers are paid below minimum wage to behave like algorithms, to do work that is supposed to blend seamlessly into AI systems, often to great psychological detriment to themselves. And even when we talk about systems that are using supervised or unsupervised learning, that means they are being trained, i.e. fed data, in such a way that it stores probabilities. But when broken down to its component parts, these systems are still just performing calculations and code operations. They're not sophisticated agents understanding in the same way that you and I can understand each other. So why does it matter that you know all of this, and what is to be done? If left to its own devices, AI is not going to kill us all, as you hopefully learned in one of the other myths busted in this series. But it is going to be designed by people who don't know you and don't think like you. Because AI impacts each of us at this point, it matters that we know what it can and can't do, so that we can contribute to conversations about what it should and shouldn't do next. Getting intimidated by confusing jargon or blowing AI off as just the fancy algorithms lets a powerful status quo continue deciding how AI gets used and abused, impacting vulnerable people unequally. But by not self-gatekeeping and by valuing interdisciplinary knowledge that comes in different forms and from different voices, a variety of people who bring different perspectives can help decide how AI gets made and implemented. We need interdisciplinary, intersectional collaborations, conversation and effort toward understanding AI's impacts and imaginaries across fields and life experiences that diverge, understanding that this can create more robust technology to benefit us all. Some folks are already thinking critically about how to shift this conversation, where to take AI tools next, and how to teach others about AI who maybe didn't have access before. There are lots of great examples, which I'm compiling as part of my research at the Higg, but I'll quickly highlight 3 kinds of projects here. There's Color-Coded LA, a POC-only space in Los Angeles for co-learning and co-creation of technologies that holds workshops on things like ancestral tech and streaming justice and more. There's the Data Nutrition Label, which helps researchers understand the quality of data sets they plan to utilize before they put them into AI systems. And there's ML5JS, a code library that adapts machine learning tools for artist coders and beginners so that they can play with and better understand common algorithms like PoseNet and image classifier. All of these approaches meet different kinds of makers where they are and strive to make AI processes more visible, approachable, and accessible. Through this, they also become more ethical and diverse too. So, my call to action to you is to understand AI. Don't be intimidated. We really can believe that AI is for anyone, and you can start where you are. Also, don't be fooled. AI is not rational, magic, or human-free. Do pay attention to language. AI is not understanding the same way that you do. Be careful when you hear people talk about it as if it has agency or as if the people using it have no responsibility in the matter or the people designing it have no responsibility in the matter. do ask who is included, and even more importantly, ask who is left out. AI really is for everyone. And is everyone who it's applied to actually helped by it? We need intersectional approaches that include a multitude of voices in order to approach AI in ways that don't assume a black box or the same cultural biases we've been stuck with for decades. Whether you're a user scrolling your social media feed or an engineer working on AI explainability, it's all too easy to fall back on the idea of AI as an incomprehensible but all-knowing black box. The power of this myth leaves us powerless against bias and unable to take full responsibility for our relationships with technology. But removing that veil of intimidation and obfuscation lets each of us approach AI with more informed and critical lenses, while thinking out of the box to imagine its futures. Thank you.